A bustling hospital hallway late at night, Emma rushes past a silent German shepherd who hasn't moved from his spot outside room 412. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows along the sterile walls of the hospital corridor. Emma's sneakers squeaked against the tiled floor as she hurried toward her next patient, her mind heavy with exhaustion. But something caught her eye. A large German shepherd sitting motionless near room 412. His dark eyes glimmered under the flickering light, fixed on the door as though it held some invisible tether to his soul. For weeks now, he had been there, an enigma no one could explain. Emma slowed her pace, her heart skipping a beat. There was something haunting about the way he sat, so still, so deliberate, as if guarding a secret only he understood. She felt an inexplicable chill run down her spine, even amidst the warmth of the crowded hallway. Who was this dog? And why did his presence feel so significant? Overworked and grieving, Emma feels the weight of loneliness despite being surrounded by patients and colleagues every day. Emma shook off the thought and continued down the hall, but her mind lingered on the dog. It wasn't just curiosity, it was familiarity. The sadness radiating from him mirrored her own. Months had passed since her father's death, yet the void left behind seemed to grow wider with each passing day. She glanced around at the nurses chatting quietly at the station, the doctors reviewing charts, and the patients sleeping behind closed doors. Despite being surrounded by people, Emma often felt utterly alone. Her work kept her busy, but it also numbed her emotions, leaving her disconnected from everything and everyone around her. As she turned back toward room 412, her gaze fell once more on the dog. Something about him stirred feelings she'd buried deep inside. Maybe it was the way he carried himself, with quiet dignity, despite whatever pain weighed him down. Or maybe it was simply that they were both adrift in their grief. The German shepherd sits motionless, refusing food or water, leaving staff baffled but unwilling to intervene. Emma approached cautiously, stopping a few feet away. The dog didn't move, not even when a nurse walked by offering scraps of food, or a security guard muttered about calling animal control. He remained rooted to the spot, his posture unwavering, his focus unbroken. It was eerie, almost otherworldly, how steadfast he was. No one knew where he'd come from or why he refused to leave. Some speculated he belonged to a visitor. Others thought he might be lost. Yet none dared remove him. Not because they feared what he might do, but because there was something profoundly respectful about his vigil. Emma crouched slightly, tilting her head as she studied him. "What are you waiting for?" she whispered softly, though she doubted he'd answer. Still, the question hung in the air between them, unanswered, but somehow understood. Emma feels an unshakable pull toward the dog, sensing that his loyalty holds a deeper meaning than anyone else realizes. Her chest tightened as she stared at him. There was intelligence in those eyes, wisdom even. Whatever or whoever he was waiting for, it mattered deeply to him. And strangely, it mattered to her, too. Emma hesitated before taking another step closer. She reached out tentatively, palm open, half expecting him to flinch or retreat. Instead, he tilted his head ever so slightly, studying her with the same intensity she'd given him. In that moment, Emma felt a spark of connection, a fragile thread linking her grief to his. She couldn't explain it, but she knew instinctively that this dog wasn't just a stray or a nuisance. He was here for a reason, and somehow she was meant to discover it. Taking a deep breath, she murmured, "I'll figure this out. I promise." The dog blinked slowly, as if acknowledging her words. Then, without moving an inch, he exhaled heavily. his body relaxing ever so slightly. Emma straightened, resolved, settling over her like a warm blanket. Whatever mystery surrounded this loyal creature, she would uncover it. Because in his silence she saw echoes of her own pain, and perhaps a path toward healing. One stormy evening, Emma kneels cautiously in the dim hallway, extending a trembling hand toward the silent German shepherd. The rain lashed against the hospital windows, its rhythmic pattern echoing through the quiet corridors. Emma paused outside room 412, her breath hitching as she stared at the dog who had become a fixture of her nightly rounds. Tonight felt different, his presence heavier, more urgent. Summoning her courage, she crouched low, her knees brushing the cold tile floor. Her hand hovered midair, trembling slightly as she reached out to him. "It's okay," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the storm outside. "I'm not going to hurt you." Her heart pounded in her chest, unsure if he would retreat or snap. But instead, he sat still, his dark eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her feel both exposed and understood. It was as though he were testing her, not just her intentions but her resolve. To her astonishment, the dog allows Emma to touch him without flinching, a rare sign of trust from an animal who has rejected everyone else. Emma froze when her fingertips brushed the coarse fur of his neck. He didn't move, didn't growl, didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned into her touch ever so slightly, exhaling a soft sigh that seemed to carry the weight of weeks of loneliness. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes as she realized the significance of this moment. This dog, who had refused food from others, who had ignored every attempt at comfort, had chosen her. Chosen to let her in, even if only a little. Her throat tightened as she whispered, "You've been waiting here all this time, haven't you?" The dog blinked slowly, his gaze unwavering. In that simple act, Emma felt something shift, a fragile thread of connection forming between them, one that neither could fully understand yet. Emma learns that the dog belongs to Mr. Thompson, an elderly ICU patient admitted after a severe stroke, with no family nearby to care for him or his loyal companion. Later that night, curiosity got the better of Emma. She approached the nurse's station, flipping through the patient files until she found what she was looking for. Mr. Thompson, room 412. The notes were sparse but telling. An elderly man brought in after collapsing at home, no known family contacts listed. And then, tucked into the margins of the intake form, a single line caught her attention. Patient accompanied by German shepherd upon arrival. Her stomach churned as the pieces fell into place. This wasn't just some stray dog, he belonged to Mr. Thompson. Whatever bond they shared had kept the dog rooted to this spot, day after day, refusing to leave his side. Emma closed the file, her mind racing. How long has it been since anyone visited Mr. Thompson? Did he even know his dog was still here, watching over him? Subheading, though hesitant, she's never owned a pet before. Emma feels drawn to the sadness in the dog's eyes, sensing there's more to his story than meets the eye. Back in the hallway, Emma stood a few feet away from the dog, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She'd never had a pet growing up, let alone taken care of one now. What did she know about dogs, about their needs, their instincts? And yet she couldn't shake the feeling that this dog needed her, or maybe it was the other way around. There was something achingly familiar in the way he carried himself, the way his eyes mirrored the same emptiness she felt inside. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "What am I supposed to do with you?" she asked aloud, half expecting no response. But the dog tilted his head, his ears perking slightly, as if urging her to keep talking, to keep trying. Emma bit her lip, torn between doubt and determination. Maybe she didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't walk away from him. Not now. Why does this dog refuse to leave? What invisible thread ties him so strongly to Mr. Thompson? As the hours passed, Emma found herself lingering near room 412, stealing glances at the dog whenever she could. His loyalty gnawed at her thoughts, raising questions she couldn't ignore. What kind of bond could inspire such devotion? Was it love, duty, or something deeper, something primal that transcended words? Her gaze drifted to the closed door of Mr. Thompson's room. Inside lay a man fighting for his life, unaware, or perhaps too far gone, to realize that his faithful companion was still waiting for him. Emma swallowed hard, her chest tightening. Whatever the answer, she knew one thing. This dog's vigil wasn't just about survival. It was about hope. Hope that his master will wake up. Hope that someone will come back for him. And maybe, just maybe, hope that someone like her would step in when no one else could. Emma begins visiting Max regularly, bringing snacks and blankets to comfort him in the cold hospital hallway. Over the next few days, Emma made it a point to visit Max during her breaks. She brought small offerings, snacks scavenged from the cafeteria, an old blanket she found in the supply closet. At first, he was wary, his eyes darting between her and the food as if unsure whether to trust her intentions. But Emma persisted, speaking softly as she placed the items near him. "I know you've been through something," she murmured one evening, crouching beside him. "You don't have to tell me what it is, just let me help." Slowly, hesitantly, Max began accepting her gifts. Each bite of food or nuzzle into the warmth of the blanket felt like a victory, a step closer to bridging the gap between them. For Emma, these moments were more than acts of kindness. They were lifelines, pulling her out of her own grief and into a shared journey of healing. In the dimly lit hallway, Emma shares stories about her late father with Max, finding solace in his silent companionship. Late at night, when the hospital grew quiet, Emma would sit cross-legged on the floor beside Max. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the silence, but it didn't feel oppressive. Not with him there. "I miss him so much," she admitted one evening, her voice trembling. "He used to take me hiking every weekend. I haven't stepped foot on a trail since—" Her words trailed off, tears welling up in her eyes. Max tilted his head, his ears perked slightly as if listening intently. Then, without warning, he rested his chin on her knee, his warm breath brushing against her hand. It wasn't pity, it was understanding. In that moment, Emma realized she wasn't alone in her pain. Max carried his own burdens, yet here he was, offering her comfort without asking for anything in return. Max's haunted behavior becomes evident. He growls at strangers and refuses food unless Emma personally offers it. Despite their progress, Max's trauma lingered just beneath the surface. One afternoon, a janitor approached him with a friendly smile and an outstretched hand. Max's lip curled back in a low growl, his body stiffening as he backed away. The man quickly retreated, startled, leaving Emma to soothe him with gentle reassurances. Even meals became a test of trust. He refused food unless Emma handed it to him directly, ignoring anyone else who tried. It frustrated some of the staff, but Emma understood. It wasn't defiance, it was fear. Every growl, every flinch, reminded her of how fragile their bond still was. Yet, instead of discouraging her, it only deepened her resolve to earn his trust completely. Emma wrestles with guilt, questioning whether caring for Max is distracting her from work and responsibilities. As the days turned into weeks, Emma found herself spending more and more time with Max. But with each passing day, doubts crept in. Was she neglecting her patients, letting her emotions cloud her judgment? One particularly grueling shift left her exhausted and overwhelmed. As she collapsed onto a bench during her break, she glanced over at Max, who sat patiently nearby. "Am I doing the right thing?" she whispered, half to herself, half to him. Her mind raced with conflicting thoughts. She wanted to believe she was helping him, but what if she was only making things worse, for both of them? What if she couldn't give him the life he deserved? Max nudged her arm gently, as if sensing her turmoil. His unwavering presence reminded her why she'd started this journey in the first place. Still, the weight of uncertainty pressed heavily on her heart. As weeks pass, Max starts following Emma during her breaks, staying close even outside the hospital walls. Gradually, a routine formed between them. During her breaks, Max followed her like a shadow, padding silently beside her as she walked the hospital grounds. On sunny afternoons, they ventured outside together, where Max sniffed curiously at patches of grass and wagged his tail at the sound of birds chirping overhead. These moments brought Emma a sense of peace she hadn't felt in months. Watching Max explore the world around him reminded her of simpler times before loss and loneliness had taken hold. Yet, even as their bond strengthened, a shadow loomed over their newfound joy. Mr. Thompson's condition remained critical, and the question of what would happen to Max hung unanswered in the air. Doctors warn that Mr. Thompson's recovery is unlikely, leaving Emma anxious about what will happen to Max once he passes. The doctor's updates grew increasingly grim. "It's only a matter of time," one nurse confided to Emma during a quiet moment. "We're doing everything we can, but—" Emma nodded numbly, though her chest tightened with dread. She avoided looking at room 412 now, unable to face the reality waiting behind its closed door. Instead, she focused on Max, clinging to the hope that somehow they'd find a way forward. Together. But the truth lingered at the edges of her thoughts, gnawing at her resolve. If Mr. Thompson didn't make it, what would become of Max? Would he be sent to a shelter forgotten by everyone except her? The idea was unbearable, yet impossible to ignore. When Mr. Thompson dies, Emma fears Max will be abandoned or sent to a shelter, forcing her to confront her feelings. The news came on a gray, rain-soaked morning. Mr. Thompson had passed away peacefully in his sleep. Emma stood frozen in the hallway, staring at room 412, as if expecting the door to open and reveal him sitting there, alive and well. When she finally turned to Max, her heart shattered at the sight of him. He lay curled up in his usual spot, his body trembling as if he already knew. Tears streamed down Emma's face as she knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around his neck. "What am I going to do without you?" she choked out, her voice breaking. For the first time, she allowed herself to fully acknowledge the depth of her attachment to him. He wasn't just a stray dog or a patient's pet. He was her companion, her confidant, her lifeline. And now, faced with the possibility of losing him too, she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't let him go. Devastated by Mr. Thompson's passing, Emma is heartbroken when Max vanishes from the hospital without a trace. The days following Mr. Thompson's death were a blur of grief and exhaustion for Emma. But amidst her sorrow, one constant remained. Max, until he didn't. One morning, she arrived at the hospital to find his usual spot empty. Panic surged through her as she searched every corner of the building, calling out his name in desperation. "Max, where are you?" Her voice echoed down the sterile hallways, met only by silence. Her chest tightened with dread. Had he left because he sensed there was nothing left for him here? Or worse, had something happened to him? The thought of losing him after everything they'd been through was unbearable. Determined to find Max, Emma searches tirelessly, checking nearby streets, parks, and shelters, but days pass with no sign of him. Emma refused to give up. After finishing her shifts at the hospital, she scoured the surrounding neighborhoods, her sneakers pounding against pavement slick with rain. She visited local shelters, clutching a hastily printed flyer with Max's picture, but no one had seen him. Each dead end felt like a punch to the gut. Sleep eluded her. Food tasted like ash. All she could think about was Max, his warm fur, his trusting eyes, the way he'd leaned into her touch. What if she never saw him again? "Please be okay," she whispered to herself as she walked under dim streetlights late one night. "I can't lose you too." Days later, Emma discovers Max lying weak and malnourished near the park where Mr. Thompson once walked him. On the fourth day of searching, Emma's steps led her to the park where Mr. Thompson used to take Max. The swings creaked softly in the wind, and leaves crunched beneath her feet as she called his name one last time. Then she saw him. A shadow of his former self collapsed near a bench. His ribs showed through his matted fur, and his breathing was shallow. Tears streamed down Emma's face as she ran to him, dropping to her knees beside him. "Oh, Max," she choked out, stroking his head gently. "What have you done to yourself?" He whimpered faintly, lifting his head just enough to nuzzle her hand. In that moment, all her fears crystallized. She couldn't let him go. Not now, not ever. Torn between fostering Max or adopting him permanently, Emma wrestles with doubts about whether she can provide the care he needs. As Emma carried Max back to her car, her mind raced with questions. Could she really take him home? She barely had time for herself between work and life. How could she possibly care for a dog who needed so much attention? But the alternative, a shelter, strangers, abandonment, was unthinkable. Every instinct screamed at her to protect him, to give him the second chance he deserved. Yet doubt lingered, gnawing at her resolve. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this," she admitted aloud, glancing at Max curled up in the passenger seat. He looked up at her with those soulful eyes, as if saying, "You already are." During a violent thunderstorm, Max risks his weakened body to shield Emma from a falling tree branch, proving his unwavering devotion. That night, a fierce storm rolled in, rattling Emma's small apartment windows. Exhausted from caring for Max, she stepped outside briefly to check the yard. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the chaos around them. A loud crack startled her. A massive tree branch tore free, hurtling toward her. Before she could react, Max lunged forward, shoving her out of the way with what little strength he had left. They tumbled to the ground together, the branch crashing inches from where they lay. Emma stared at Max in shock, tears streaming down her face as she hugged him close. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "After everything I've put you through, you still chose me." At that moment, any lingering doubts vanished. Max wasn't just a stray dog or a patient's pet, he was family, and she would do whatever it took to keep him safe. With renewed determination, Emma fights against time to nurse Max back to health, battling both physical challenges and her own self-doubt. Over the next few weeks, Emma poured everything she had into Max's recovery. She fed him tiny portions of bland food, coaxed him to drink water, and cleaned his wounds with trembling hands. Each small improvement, a wag of his tail, a bark in greeting, felt like a victory. But it wasn't easy. There were nights when she cried herself to sleep, overwhelmed by the weight of responsibility. Nights when she questioned whether she was doing enough. Yet, through it all, Max stayed by her side, his loyalty unwavering. Slowly, But surely, his strength returned, mirroring the resilience growing within Emma herself. Together, they faced each challenge head-on, proving that their bond was stronger than anything life threw their way. With love and patience, Emma nurses Max back to health, watching as his strength slowly returns day by day. Each morning, Emma greeted Max with a gentle pat on the head and a soft-spoken promise. "We're going to get through this together." And slowly, he began to believe her. The once frail dog who could barely lift his head now stood tall, his muscles regaining their tone and his coat shining under the sunlight streaming through the window. He started eating heartily again, wagging his tail at the sound of Emma's voice. Every small victory felt monumental, a testament to the power of care and trust. Emma marveled at how far they'd come. It wasn't just Max who was healing, she was too. Their bond had become a lifeline, pulling them both out of the darkness that had consumed them after Mr. Thompson's death. Emma learns to balance her demanding nursing job with personal time, finding peace and purpose in Max's unwavering companionship. With Max by her side, Emma found a rhythm she hadn't known was missing. She began setting boundaries at work, leaving on time to take long walks with him in the evenings. The quiet moments they shared, watching sunsets or sitting under starlit skies, brought her a sense of calm she hadn't felt in years. Max's presence reminded her to slow down, to breathe, to live fully. For the first time since her father's passing, she no longer felt like she was drowning. Instead, she felt buoyed by the unconditional love radiating from her loyal companion. "You've changed everything," she murmured one evening, scratching behind his ears. Max leaned into her touch, his eyes filled with gratitude. Max sheds his grieving demeanor, becoming playful and protective, a stark contrast to the shadow he once was. Gone was the haunted look in Max's eyes, replaced by a spark of mischief and joy. He barked excitedly when Emma grabbed his leash, chased squirrels during their walks, and even playfully nudged her hand when she sat reading on the couch. But it wasn't just his playfulness that stood out. It was his protectiveness. If a stranger approached too quickly, or if thunder rumbled outside, Max positioned himself between Emma and whatever he perceived as a threat. His loyalty knew no bounds, and Emma couldn't help but feel safe with him by her side. "He's not the same dog I met in that hallway," she thought, smiling as he bounded ahead of her on the trail. "He's so much more." On the anniversary of Mr. Thompson's passing, Emma takes Max to the park where they first connected. One crisp autumn morning, Emma clipped Max's leash to his collar and led him to the park where Mr. Thompson used to walk him. The air smelled of fallen leaves, and golden sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the ground. They stopped near the bench where Emma had found Max weak and vulnerable months ago. She knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around his neck. "This is where it all began," she whispered. "You brought me here, Max. You saved me without even knowing it." Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked skyward, silently thanking Mr. Thompson for bringing them together. Though he was gone, his legacy lived on in the bond they shared. As Max runs freely across the park, Emma watches with a smile, knowing she's given him a second chance at life. Unclipping his leash, Emma gave Max the freedom to explore. He bolted across the open field, his paws kicking up tufts of grass as he ran. The sight of him bounding effortlessly, completely free, filled her with an overwhelming sense of pride and fulfillment. She watched him chase after a flock of birds, his tail wagging furiously before circling back to her with a bark that seemed to say, "Thank you." Emma laughed, wiping away a tear. In that moment, she realized how much they'd healed, not just physically but emotionally. They had faced loss, fear, and uncertainty together, emerging stronger on the other side. Emma realizes that by saving Max, he has also saved her, proving that love can heal even the deepest wounds. As Max returned to her side, panting happily, Emma crouched down to meet his gaze. "You know," she said softly, "I thought I was rescuing you. But really, you rescued me." Her words hung in the air, carried away by the breeze. Max tilted his head, studying her with those wise, soulful eyes that had seen so much pain yet still chose to trust. In that moment, Emma understood the truth. Their bond wasn't about ownership or obligation, it was about mutual healing. Through love, patience, and unwavering loyalty, they had saved each other. And as they walked home together side by side, Emma knew their journey was just beginning. Together, they would face whatever lay ahead, forever bound by the resilience of their hearts. Through their journey, Emma and Max discover that healing often comes not through words, but through the silent strength of unconditional love. As Emma reflected on everything they'd been through, the sleepless nights, the desperate searches, the moments of doubt, she realized something profound. It wasn't grand gestures or eloquent speeches that had healed them. It was the quiet, unwavering presence of one another. Max didn't need to speak to show her he cared. His loyalty, his trust, his willingness to stay by her side even when she faltered spoke louder than any words ever could. And in return, Emma's patience and devotion reminded him that love could exist beyond loss. Together they proved that sometimes silence carried the most powerful messages. Both Emma and Max carried scars from their pasts, yet together they found hope and renewal in each other's presence. Emma thought about the weight she'd carried since losing her father, the loneliness, the guilt, the feeling of being untethered. Max bore his own invisible wounds, memories of Mr. Thompson and the life they'd shared now gone. Yet neither of them had faced those scars alone. In each other, they found solace. Their pain became a bridge rather than a barrier, connecting two broken souls who understood what it meant to grieve and rebuild. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were thriving, thanks to the bond they'd forged. Their story reminds us that compassion, both given and received, is a powerful force that helps us overcome even the deepest losses. Emma smiled as she watched Max chase after a leaf swirling in the wind. She thought about how far they'd come, not just physically, but emotionally. Compassion had been their lifeline. Her kindness toward Max had saved him, yes, but his unwavering loyalty had saved her too. It wasn't always easy. There were days when doubt crept in, when fear threatened to pull them apart. But every act of care, no matter how small, had built a foundation strong enough to withstand anything. Together, they showed that resilience wasn't about going it alone. It was about leaning on someone who truly understood. Even in loss, new beginnings are possible, a testament to the enduring spirit of life and love. Standing there in the crisp autumn air, Emma felt a sense of peace settle over her. Yes, they had lost so much. Her father, Mr. Thompson, the lives they once knew. But out of that loss had come something beautiful. A partnership rooted in trust, love, and mutual healing. Life would never erase the pain of what they'd endured, but it had given them something equally powerful, a chance to start anew. As Max trotted back to her, tail wagging and eyes bright with joy, Emma knew this was only the beginning. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, forever bound by the resilience of their hearts.